I would like, first of all, to take the opportunity to address the participants of this important conference on men's rights. And the topic of my presentation is the link between child support scheme and unfair parental alienation, ultimately leading to the growth of male suicide in Australia. Parental alienation is something that obliterates the relationship between good parents and their children. It will be a central issue and can be in child custody disputes, and it is a leading cause of the quite a disturbing incidence of male suicide in this country. There is an undeniable link between the child support payments or child support scheme and these malicious attempts by some parents to eradicate the relationship between the child and the other parent. So we have the situation in Australia that countless good parents are paying child support through the government, and yet they are completely alienated from their children. Given that child support is calculated on the number of nights that the child spends with each parent, a moral hazard is naturally created that can tempt a primary carer to withdraw access for the basest of reasons: money. One of the well-known facts about divorce in Australia is that children often adapt to their parents' separation if they are allowed to have the continuing contact with both of the parents. A recurring theme, actually, in the field of child psychoanalysis is that children of divorced parents often desire to develop a meaningful relationship with both parents, including the non residential parent. But here in Australia, the Department of Human Services is the federal agency, by the way, responsible for determining the level of financial support that non residential parents are expected to pay to the other parent. The amount required is based on the amount of care received by a child from each parent, which is then determined by the time this child will spend with his or her non-residential parent. Contrary to this popular belief that we sometimes say prevailing and promoted by the mainstream media, child support payments have absolutely nothing to do with fathers abandoning their children. The Child Support Agency was established by federal legislation by the Commonwealth Government in 1988, and legislation passed in 1989 imposed a mandatory formula for all parents who got separated. There are some obvious financial advantages available for those who maliciously alienate another parent for their children. Indeed, the support payments have become a profitable reward for narcissistic parents who make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, I must say, for the other parents to develop any meaningful relationship with their children. After all, if the non residential parent spends a more substantial or meaningful time with his children, then the amount paid to the other parent is lower than it would be if the relationship were completely broken down, or if their children were cared for after the separation entirely by one parent. So you can see the perverse incentive for parental alienation naturally arising. Developed in the late 1980s to oust the jurisdiction of the courts in relation to child support, the scheme was originally justified as a method of recovering welfare costs, reducing the expenses of government. Child support payments have been, therefore, transformed into a massive subsidy for unilateral divorce. The child support scheme was certainly motivated by concerns about growing welfare expenditure. Indeed, Professor Patrick Parkson refers to this scheme being largely driven by the need to ensure that private transfers of money from fathers to mothers reduced the burden of the state in terms of its own expenditure. As noted also by Paxson, the child support schemes provides, according to him, perverse incentives for primary caregivers to resist children spending more time with the other parent to avoid a reduction in the child support obligation. As far as possible, such perverse incentives need to be avoided, says Professor Paxson, and legislative policies in these areas should be in harmony rather than conflict, he concludes. Indeed, these support payments have become an entitlement to be assessed on parents and even on those who are unwillingly divorced against their will and prevented, therefore, from developing a more meaningful relationship with the children. Because as a result of this situation, a loving parent may be forcibly separated from his or her child, and such payments are awarded ostensibly and regardless of any reference to fault at all. So no-fault divorce allowed the mother to divorce her husband for any reason or no reason whatsoever, and to take the child with her. Child support then took the process a step further by allowing the divorcing mother to use the now fatherless children to claim her ex-husband's income, also regardless of any fault on her part or lack of fault on his, in abrogating the marriage contract arrangement. Across Australia, many parents are now being told in mediation sections or by lawyers that there is no hope of overnight contact with their children. In view of the financial reward naturally obtained by this crooked system, the position of the parents, some parents, is that the other parent should spend the littlest possible time with the children in order to obtain undue financial advantages. A parent holding temporary custody of the child may decide to procrastinate custody litigation to prevent the other parent's access to the children. When this awful situation occurs, a loving parent may entirely lose access to the children through no fault or agreement or his own volition. There is some evidence that expectations of child support may be a leading factor in influencing women to initiate divorce proceedings. It's quite clear that many more women today can contemplate divorce with greater confidence, that the benefits might outweigh the losses, subject to the material and emotional costs of divorce. By contrast, a crucial issue for men is the risk of separation from their children, a loss of regular contact after divorce if the residence and primary care rests with the mother. For men, a particular cause of dismay and anger at divorce may be the loss or partial loss of contact with children they loved, protected, helped, and raised. Thousands and thousands of Australian fathers have had their contact with their young children limited to only a few hours, often spent huge, these people, sums of money on lawyers fighting to be able to care for the children, fighting. There are many parents, almost always mothers, who defy these court orders, to let the other parent have any contact whatsoever with the children. Judges seem to be extremely reluctant to jail such parents. So many of these irresponsible mothers continue to get away with it. In this context, one should consider the alarming level of suicides by post-separation fathers who are entirely alienated from their children. Over 1 million children in Australia are living without their parents, their fathers, better say. and that the legislation underpinning the Family Court of Australian Child Support Agency has been a major factor contributing to this fatherlessness crisis. The death rate amongst child support paying fathers is almost the double of the rate of Australian males who do not have child support assessments. The Australian Institute of Health and Welfare reports that the suicide rate for men aged 20 to 39 has risen 70% over the last 2 years alone. This finding has been highlighted in an academic paper by Dr. Susan Beaton and Peter Foster. It's published by the Australian Psychological Society, and these two experts in suicide prevention explain that suicide, better say, is the number one killer of men under 44 years in Australia, and that the dramatic increase in male suicide is at least partially due to marriage breakdown coupled with poorer social support among divorced males. So suicide is a far more prevalence, I can say, amongst Australian males than females, which is consistent with current trends observed across other Western nations. Of course, a similar rise in female suicides, if it was also occurring, there would certainly be a public outcry and a demand for remedy. Yet, the extraordinarily high rate of male suicide is rarely discussed. One basic reason for the dramatic growth in male suicide is the discrimination encountered by fathers in the family courts, especially the denial of access to children. According to sociology professor Augustine Kopsova of the University of California, divorce following the loss of contact with the children is a major factor of male suicide. As far as the divorced man is concerned, he has lost his marriage, lost his children, and can lead this can lead to depression and suicide. Professor Kupsova, he has a seminal study which endeavors to examine the effect of marital status on the risk of suicide. Using a nationally very large representative sample, he noted that the risk of suicide among divorced men was 2.4 times higher than that of their married counterparts. Among women, however, there was no statistically significant differentials in the risk of suicide by marital and non-marital categories. Indeed, divorced men were nearly 10 times more likely to commit suicide than comparable divorced women. This leads to the conclusion that divorce followed by the loss of access to children has a strong net effect, very strong, on mortality from suicide, but only among men. But why are divorced men killing themselves? Well, Professor Kotswova explains. Some analysts, according to him, argue that societal institutions tend to ignore or minimize male problems as evident in suicide statistics. For instance, in many jurisdictions, there seems to be an implicit assumption that the bond between a woman and her children is stronger than between a man and his children. As a consequence, in divorce settlement, custody of children is very likely to be given to the wife. In the end, the father loses not only his marriage, but loses his children. The result may be anger at the court system, especially in situations wherein the husband feels completely betrayed because it was the wife that initiated the divorce, or because the courts virtually gave away everything that was previously owned by the ex-husband or the now defunct household to the former wife. Events could spiral into resentment by natural order toward the spouse and the resentment toward the system. Bitterness, anxiety, depression, reduced self-esteem, and that ultimately leads to a sense of life not worth living. As depression and poor mental health are known markers of suicide risk, it may well be that one of the fundamental reasons for the observed association between divorce and suicide in men is the impact of post-divorce arrangements. This explains, for instance, why good men like Darrell White, a loving and caring father, hanged himself after being denied access to his children because he could not afford to pay child support that was twice his take home pay. In a letter signed in memory of my loving father, his distressed 14-year-old daughter stated, and I quote, I know my father was a good man and a good father. He obviously reached the point where he could see that justice was beyond his reach, and then he decided to take his life. And he thought this was the only way to end his suffering. This is so cruel. The alienation of a parent from his child in order for another person maliciously obtain financial gain via child support payment constitutes a very serious form of child abuse. Those who refuse to let a good parent to see his children should be punished, and severely so, and not financially rewarded as it is the present occurring in this present context. Since child support payments is therefore, and I have explained, a leading cause of parental alienation, which in turn is a primary cause of the growth of male suicide, my understanding is that the child support scheme should be entirely abolished and a more equitable arrangement in financial and for and emotional condition of the parties involved be provided. That is for the well-being of the parents and the children alike. Justice must always prevail, and those who act in a malicious manner should be punished by the system and not rewarded as it currently is the case. Thank you very much for the opportunity that I had to provide my assessment of the current status of alienated parents and the link between parental alienation and child support payments. It's time to fight against this in order to save the lives of many children and parents who have suffered very dearly as a result of a system that rewards immoral and irresponsible behavior. Thank you very much for the attention that you have given to me, and I wish you all the best and a very good time in this conference. Thank you very much.